Ave Maris Stella.
Hello, welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. This is your host, Father Matthew Schneider. I am a priest of the Church of Christ, and I teach theology. This is a podcast on the Star Christ Production Network at sqpn.com. Today, we're on day 177 in Recovering Gravissimus Educationes, 6-7 on moral education of all. If you want to follow along, we have a reading plan and more details at sqpn.com/Vatican. Yesterday, we spoke about how we eagerly apply all means in education as a church, and schools are valuable in education beyond just information. Today, we're covering two titles in this document, so I'll give the titles in the text, and the summary kind of is for the two parts. Paragraph 6 is about parents are primary educators, and the state should ensure choice. Paragraph 7 is about the church needs to be involved in education to ensure morals. So the title for paragraph 6 is the duties and rights of the parents. The summary, as there's three subparagraphs. A talks about parents are primary educators, so the state must ensure the possibility of choosing schools. B, the state must ensure good teacher training and no monopoly on schools. And then C, all should ensure good teacher training. So this is really about that aspect of schools, the duties and rights of parents, and the idea that schools are well and schools have a choice there. So let's read A. Parents who have the primary and inalienable right and duty to educate their children must enjoy true liberty in their own choice of schools. Consequently, the public power, which has the obligation to protect and defend the rights of citizens, must see to it, in its concern for distributive justice, that public subsidies are paid out in such a way that parents are truly free to choose according to their conscience the schools they want for their children. So again, this is emphasizing that parents are the primary educators of their children, talking about the rights and duties. This has been a theme which we've already covered here, so I'm not going to go too much in depth in it, even though this is the paragraph that might be most on it. I kind of went a little further into it before. And then it's talking about the public authorities, so like the government, state, national government, whatever, needs to ensure parents can actually choose. So how they do taxing, how they do funding for schools needs to make sure this is a free choice. And it talks about subsidies here. Those could be things like vouchers. The most common in the U.S. is vouchers, but also even things like tax refunds that cover a majority of the school cost. Because it's not necessarily to say that this needs to be that if parents choose, say, the Catholic school, the government needs to pay 100% of it. If the government's like, hey, we'll pay, 75% up to 75% of what public schools gets for a public school student or something like that, if you're going to a private school, and we're going to give it as a tax refund, that seems to match with this. But some kind of way so that parents have that choice without going broke if the parents are, middle working class. So those are an option, not just for the upper class people. So moving on to 6b, it talks about the state needs to ensure good teacher training and no monopoly, which really gives that for the parents, right? You need the teacher training so that parents can really have trust in the schools, and then you need no monopoly so they can really choose. So let's read it. In addition, it is a task of the state to see to it that all citizens are able to come to a suitable share in culture and are properly prepared to exercise their civic duties and rights. Therefore, the state must protect the right of children to an adequate school education, check on the ability of teachers and the excellence in their training, look after the health of pupils, and in general, promote the whole school project. But it must always keep in mind the principle of subsidiarity so that there is no kind of school monopoly, for this is opposed to the native rights of the human person, to the development and spread of culture, to the peaceful association of citizens, and to the pluralism that exists today in ever so many societies. So here we go. The state must ensure that education, adequate education, right? So they have that adequate education so they can get into culture. So there isn't a monopoly, right? Here it mentions this idea of subsidiary, right? So the parents have that choice and that of what they want for their children. Now, obviously, this is not to say that there shouldn't be standards. If parents want to do kind of some forms of unschooling where they don't give any direction to kids, that can be problematic, and kids can be, 12 years old and not be able to read even at a second or third grade level, which is unless they have some kind of mental handicap, that should not be the case. But if you're homeschooling and your kids are reading a grade or two ahead, and have math at the grade level and things like that. There's no issue, right? And this idea of monopoly can also lead to a laziness, lack of motivation, lack of innovation, and it needs to allow for specific cultures because there are cultures that are different and even things that are not necessarily good or bad. I know, for example, there are things that are different in Canadian culture versus Hispanic culture. And I know in my own community, I end up being with a lot of Hispanics. So I've learned the differences and things like that are just different. There's even differences between Canadian and American culture, although much smaller. And so that's what we have to think about there. We have to think about how this matches with different cultures, including with the church. And we need this adequate formation of teachers. And this adequate formation is not just, hey, they know pedagogy, they know the material. No, but they also need to know moral human information they can pass on to the students. Because if you have a teacher who knows all the pedagogy and knows the material, but is teaching the students to worship Satan or to do all kinds of crazy other things that are contrary to natural law and contrary to reason and contrary to the faith, or to steal or things like that, that's a problem. And and teachers should also form students in things like, combing their hair and learning to be a decent human being and other things, right? I remember my mom's rule when I was in school. You can look at my elementary school photos, and every second year I have a buzz cut because my mom's rule was like, you either keep your hair combed or you get a buzz cut, and it would go back and forth. How much I wanted to pay attention and comb my hair because I was not the most dignified little boy. I was just like, hey, why does my hair need to be combed? Okay, well, you're getting a buzz cut. Okay, that's fine. So anyways, let's move on to 6C. All should ensure good teacher training. Let's read it. Therefore, the Sacred Synod exhorts the faithful to assist their utmost in finding suitable methods of education and programs of study and informing teachers who can give youth a true education. Through the Association of Parents in particular, they should further with the assistance all work of the school, but especially the moral education it must impart. So there is this importance of educating all formators, giving them the right formation, and so that they learn well. And this is where I think it's especially important for Catholic colleges and universities to have really good teacher training programs that not just on a church level teach them there, but also even a secular level, so that the Catholic teachers are the most sought out, the teachers from the Catholic schools, and we can spread the gospel that way. And that's a huge thing for great education. And then they can give that true education that includes not just the material, but also the human, the moral, and things like that. And the second part is about how parents and teachers need to collaborate because they're all educators of the children. And so there needs to be a cooperation and collaboration between the two. So moving on to paragraph 7, the title is Moral and Religious Education in All Schools. There are 2 subparagraphs. A is on the church needs to be present in all education, teach morals. And B is on Christian formation should rise to the level of secular education. So that's an important aspect that we'll get into what I mean by that when we get there. So let's read it. A, feeling very keenly the weighty responsibility, diligently caring for the moral and religious education of all her children, the church must be present with her own special affection and help for the great number who are being trained in schools that are not Catholic. This is possible by the witness of lives of those who teach and direct them, by the apostolic action of their fellow students, but especially by the ministry of priests and laymen who give their doctrine of salvation in a way suited to their age and circumstances and provide spiritual aid in every way the times and conditions allow. So here we have the church needing to be present to teach morals, even in secular institutions. So obviously this is not going to be directly, we're not going to have the church running a secular institution, but something like I mentioned in the last subparagraph of a Catholic school doing a lot of teacher formation, and then some of those teachers going to teach in the public schools would be a great example of how the church would indirectly be involved. And even members of the church will probably be teaching in these because, the church, especially in a country like the U.S., the church is 20 Catholics are like 25% of the population, but Catholic schools have nowhere near 25% of the students. So there's going to be Catholic teachers in public schools, most likely, and things like that. And how does it mention this? It mentions by witness, both of the teachers, but then also the witness of the students are talking about their apostolic action. What do? They go and do charity for the homeless. They witness their peers. They talk about how much they love Jesus, how wonderful the church is, things like that. And then we talk about people who instruct them, priests and lay people. It says layman, but as I noted before, sometimes the Vatican uses the non-English way of using men or man or male pronouns for the whole thing. That is somewhat of an English thing, but it's not more common today to use they, the the gender-neutral kind of they to refer to everyone. But here that obviously means it would obviously include non-males because a lot of people who teach CCD and things like that are females. So moving on to 7b, Christian formation to the rise level of secular education. And so what we refer to here is that we have a high level of secular education. We have a high level so that students learn a ton, so they learn math and science and foreign language, all these things in high school. But does the level of their education in the faith remain the same? This is the challenge of certain people who grew up Catholic, got Catholic education maybe to First Communion or maybe to confirmation when they were in 6th grade or something like that, but haven't really gotten formation further than that. Well, they've gone and gotten masters in engineering or something, and it's a disproportion between these two, and we need to make sure that there is this involvement and this idea of moral formation at the same level. Because, for example, some moral things we can't really explain in 2nd grade. I'm not going to explain to 2nd graders the ethics, basically like 90% of my bioethics class, about, I'm going to say abortion's wrong, but beyond that, about contraception and about IVF and about end of life and ordinary and extraordinary means, I'm not going to explain to my nephews in 2nd grade who are going to receive their first communion. That's just not how they're just not ready for that, and that's not an age-appropriate thing. But to like a high school student, to a college student, definitely I'll explain that. Or somebody who has, or to adults. So let's read 7b. The church reminds parents of the duty that is theirs to arrange for and even demand that their children be able to enjoy these aids and advance their Christian formation to the degree that is abreast of their development in secular subjects. Therefore, the church esteems highly those civil authorities and societies which, bearing in mind the pluralism of contemporary society and respecting religious freedom, assist families so that the education of their children can be imparted in all schools, according to the individual, moral, and religious principles of those families. So this is important that parents insist on that moral formation, and that moral formation needs to advance as their advancement in secular subjects advance. Right? And that was the example I gave just before I read this about IVF or contraception. I'm not teaching it to 2nd graders because their understanding of human physiognomy and human development is not such that they're ready for that. Whereas a high school student hopefully is ready for that, or at least a college student. And then civil authorities need to respect this. They need to respect this idea, and they need to help families and schools have good moral formation, not be an obstacle to it, not be indifferent to it, but generally favor it. Now, obviously, some of this moral formation is not necessarily going to be Catholic. If we live in a Protestant society, as we do in the U.S. and Canada, primarily at least, historically, whether today it's more of an atheist society, that's another question, but a historically Protestant society. And so maybe they have VeggieTales cartoons, which are made by Protestants, but they're teaching moral lessons from Old Testament Bible stories. Nothing wrong, contrary to Catholic faith, if those are used as moral formation in schools. Perfectly fine. So we don't need to be just this church, but we do need to have that moral formation. So thank you for listening to this episode of Vatican II in a Year. This is a listener-supported podcast. You can donate to help StarQuest produce and other great podcasts at sqpn.com/give. You can give one-time monthly during the StarQuest Patreon. Tomorrow we're going to continue with the next paragraph of Gravissime Educationes, which is paragraph 8 on Catholic schools. Please join us then to learn more about Vatican II, which provide a blueprint for the Catholic faith. If you want more information like playlists and a reading plan, go to sqpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, or Vatican SQPN on Facebook and X.
Amen.